nowadays where that's one of the gaps that kind of holds us back from success is that comparison gap that leads to
Mm.
imposter syndrome. Because the thing was, I actually had to deal with that with my follow-up book, Stay the Course, where I basically was interviewing all these folks with larger followings than me, have done way more things than me, some millionaires even. And it's like, I'm talking about elite performance. It's like, am I really the person to talk about elite performance after talking to some of these folks? And what helped me to get over that edge was realizing that there's a spin that I have, a different bent that I have, a different slant that I have to reach certain people that they may not be able to reach. And even though they are elite performers in their field, they may not write a book about elite performance. And if they decide to, that's a okay. But it's not going to be the same sauce they're going to get from me. And realizing that every single person has a gift that they need to unleash and give to the world and share with the world, and that there's going to be people that you're going to be able to reach that others may not be able to reach.
Hey, everybody, thanks for joining again this week. Today we're talking to Dominique Brightmon, who is an author of two books, Going North and Stay the Course. He also has the Going North podcast, where he talks to other authors about their books and their journey towards immortality, as he calls it, where the idea that there's a lot of benefits to people exploring authorship and writing their books. So it's a really cool conversation with a really cool character. So I'm excited for you guys to listen into the conversation with Dom. All right, Dom. Hey, appreciate you being here today. Already having some fun chatting with you, but wanted to give you a chance just kind of introduce yourself, let people know who we're listening to today.
Sure thing, Jordan, my man. Appreciate you for having me on, man. Congrats on launching the show, my man, and still continuing to do so because pod fading is freaking real. A lot of people do it, and you're not one of them, man. So keep it up. And as for me, like I'm just a wonderful guy. Yeah, extremely wonderful. I was messing with you. I'm actually a certified self leadership trainer with the Maxwell Leadership Team that likes to coach, empower, and equip others to share their stories and join the business of immortality, whether that's through writing and publishing their books or starting a podcast of their own, heck, even maybe even becoming an entrepreneur. So, yeah, man, it's really all about helping people. I'm all about books and humans, man, books and people.
Why do you think it is? Because I've listened to your show and you talk to authors. I mean, you're putting out a lot of content about it, and it's why do you think that's so important for someone to jot something down, write a book? Why is that such an important factor for you?
Solid questions. It's definitely important because books are, in a way, one of the ways you can mentor people long after you're gone. Like great authors like Jim Rohn, heck, even
Mm.
Leonardo da Vinci, some of his works out there, and just so many great, wonderful authors, like even Earl Nightingale, Napoleon Hill. Like that book, Thinking and Grow Rich, is close to being 100 years old, and that's still probably the entrepreneurial Bible of today because
Mhm.
of what it can help you develop to become. And when you leave your thoughts, your findings in a wonderful package known as a book that folks can read and devour long after you're gone 10, 20, 100 years later, maybe even hundreds of years later, heck, even the Holy Bible itself, that wonderful ancient book, like there are a lot of folks who give it a lot of flack, but it gets a lot of praise too because no other book has been translated more times than that book. And especially if you go into the Proverbs, where it just talks about tips for dynamic living that a lot of folks don't even consider, like the importance of putting your words and your thoughts down on paper and deciding to put it out as a book for the world to read and learn from is definitely something that's kind of required in a way if that's something you truly want to do, because it's a great way to document your journey and help others to advance further than before, because books help me to jokingly stay up all night even though folks may think I was born yesterday.
No, and when we think about like you've written what, two books now?
Yep, got two solo projects and two co-author books. Yes,
Okay, so
indeed.
let's say four total. And you were young when you wrote your first book. So what was the influence prior to that that made you want to do it?
Sure thing. Well, the good news about self development books, self help books, is that especially those that give you tips to succeed and you actually apply those tips to your own life, you're kind of in this guinea pig mode where you're really looking to develop yourself into a better person if you actually use the books for education and action as opposed for entertainment and just leaving it as shelf help as opposed to self help.
Mm.
And I was reading books by Brian Tracy, John Maxwell, just to name two big influences on my life. And the books that they have putting out there helped me to develop myself even better. Heck, even John Maxwell's book, Thinking for a Change, that book itself, just the fact of learning the powerful tip of just asking the right questions will take you to your next level if you answer them. Because the thing is, when you ask yourself a question, it's just not going to stay out there. It's going to be nagging at you for a while if you don't answer it. Even if you give it a silly answer, it's like, hey, what do I want to get out of life? It's like, oh, I guess a harem full of baddies. Like, it's a bad answer, but oh, depending on who you are, I
Right.
mean, it's good. Yeah, but like it's still an answer. Like you can't just leave a question hanging out there. And one of the major questions I like to ask myself daily is what good am I going to do today
Mhm.
right before going to bed because my brain gets cooking at night. And that's something for listeners to take home with them is focusing, hey, what good can I do today? What good can I share with others? Because in today's society where a lot of folks are going through it, and a lot of folks are more impatient now than ever after surviving the year that shall not be named. They're probably like, hey, let's focus on doing what's good in the world as opposed to focusing on the negativity that's going on.
Is most of what you're reading the self help style book? I mean, or is that what you've always been interested in reading, or do you kind of branch into every genre?
I branch a little. I usually stay the self help area, leadership, negotiation, business, entrepreneurship. I read novels every now and then on occasion, like 90 to 95% of what I read is nonfiction. So mostly what I read is just nonfiction books.
Does an audio book count as reading a book?
Yes, it does, because the thing is, when you're listening to a book, you're absorbing the content, and
Right.
some folks are actually better auditory learners than the visual learners because the book is right in front of you, you're reading it, but you may fall asleep. Heck, I remember in 11th grade, I was supposed to read a book before school started. I got to page two on a Saturday night and I fell asleep and woke up 2 hours later, and I'm like, oh, shit. I guess this is going to be a long 11th grade year. I read
Right.
that.
No, I think that it's books have always been a big part of my life, and I've always kind of been an old soul or a nerd, if you will, to want to read. And people always ask for recommendations. It's like, well, I don't have time to sit down with a book, and it's like, just then listen to the audio version. Like I do that now because I have young kids, and it's like just laying in bed at night. It's a great way to absorb a lot of information or catch up on some books I wanted to read, but just haven't had the time to sit and do it. So I wanted to ask an expert if they thought the same way.
Heck yeah, man. Don't down yourself on that. And folks need to stop downing others on
Yeah.
that because folks have to remember, like, hey, we learn at the end of the day, we all learn a different way. We have a stronger learning style, a learning strength than others. And like you mentioned, you got kids, man. You're a dad, like especially busy moms. They listen to
Mm.
podcasts and audiobooks and YouTube all the freaking time while they're doing housework or they're out on the go or doing a morning run or even workouts. So it's really all about getting the content within you and acting on it, not just trying to be a traditionalist like, oh, I gotta sit down, get in this special chair, be in a dusty old room with a dim lamp and read this 5,000 page tome that'll give somebody a concussion if you smack somebody with it. Like it's not all about
That sounds pretty intriguing though to me. That sounds like a vacation to be in a dusty old room with books. uh, what do you use any tools or tricks to like remember or to note what you're reading? So this is more of a personal question. I'm always interested in people that read a lot. What do you use to like whether it be take notes or just kind of then reference back to what you read to kind of keep that information fresh?
Sure thing. One thing I do, I take notes all the time. Like I got notebooks for days. And heck, even I even got a running Word document of all the books I've read for each year that I've actually finished. So if it's marked as blue, then that means the book is finished. If it's a red icon, then basically, or at least I highlighted it red. That's a book I finished after the year is over. And I usually put a purple asterisk by the books that I would actually recommend to others. Because the thing
Okay.
is, it's great to read books, and some books you read, it's like, didn't really get too much out of it too. And heck, one thing that maybe even encouraging to those who are looking to read more is be okay with not finishing a book. Because sometimes folks come at books of thinking like, oh yeah, I gotta finish this thing from cover to cover, start to finish. It's like, nah, there's no law on how to read a book. Like if you want to read chapter 6, then go ahead and read chapter 6. Heck, I even remember reading one book called, I believe it was Create Your Own Demand, where I think the chapter was Earning What You Deserve. And then the funny enough, the first sentence of that chapter was, "You're probably reading this chapter first because of the title. Go back and read
Mm,
chapter 1." So that's another reason why it's fun to pick around and choose which chapters you want to read first if something that interests you and you need that tip right now in that moment. Like it's okay to do just that. So that's really what I do. I just keep track of what I read. Heck, even sometimes using Goodreads for those books I don't mind sharing with the general public, because I don't tell everybody everything I'm reading all the time. Like, yeah,
right.
you gotta dig to find out for some of the stuff.
I mean, and you talk to so many authors. I mean, and what I would consider the podcast pretty prolific in putting out as many episodes as you have, and you still do. So, what what are some insights, whether it be, you know, just basic life lessons or just cool tidbits that you like? What are some of your favorite things you've gotten from these 600 authors?
Solid question. One tip that I love dropping all the time is creating a victory log. And for those who are familiar with gratitude journals after watching The Secret or whatever self help tool you got it from, is that, hey, it's great to have a gratitude journal, but there's some folks out there who's like, gratitude, like, dude, yeah, I'm thankful, but like, yeah, I don't like gratitude journals.
Mm-hmm.
Give me a freaking raise, forget the gratitude journal. Well, here's a spin on it. See it as a victory log, so that way you can log your victories for the day. Like getting on Jordan's podcast, that's a victory for me. Waking up today, that's a victory for me. Having both of my limbs and being, or should I say, all of my limbs being able to walk on both of my feet, that's a victory. Because there's some folks out there who don't have all their limbs still. They may be walking on one foot. If they're walking, they may only have one hand, and they may not even, and it might not even be their good hand, their writing hand. They probably have to learn to write with their left and vice versa if they're not ambidextrous. Like being able to, heck, even getting to work on time, getting through crazy traffic where it's like, dang, I missed that essential worker traffic back in the day. Like, can we
Mm.
bring that part of the pandemic back with essential worker traffic? Like, that's the part of the pandemic I
That
would
was
want
good.
back.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's like just counting, no matter how small or how big it is, just counting those things and then going back and looking over that journal and seeing how far you've grown and how far you've grown, because you'll have that proof of victory of like, hey, these are some things that I've done in my own life. Heck, even one other thing that I've learned, and this was like early in the podcast, where I think it was like episode 10 or episode 8 with Nancy Gaines, where she mentioned that if you're in business and folks start coming to you for advice, you're definitely doing something right, because there's going to be days, like even in the podcasting space, where if you're lucky enough to get past the first 10 episodes and you feel like you're not getting any feedback, any traction at all, like there may be folks who are stalking you or lurking around, but they don't like to say anything because they just want to either be A, they want to be creepy, or two, they're too scared to really like your post or whatever because they're scared of the Facebook algorithm, because it's like, oh God, I don't want all these things tracking me. Like you'd be surprised because it happened with me about a good 32 episodes in, where I got put on a list of top self help podcasters because I stayed consistent. And all these folks kept on pitching themselves to be on the show, different companies pitching their guests to be possible guests on the show. And that just came from that consistency and that visible proof that led to visible achievement. And a third thing would be to actually not only to drink more water, but try to sip more water every half an hour, as opposed to trying to guzzling down a big gulp of it like different parts of the day. Because this tip actually picked up from Julia Renee Doring, where she talked about your divine human blueprint, where most of our body's made of water, And the thing is, a lot of folks who are dehydrated, that's bad for your mind. Heck, even my father,
Mm.
who passed away from dementia, one of the trips to the emergency room that he had to make that we took him on was because he was dehydrated. We gave him water all the time, but he wouldn't drink darn near none of it. But if you stick some orange juice in front of him, he'll gulp that thing down fast with the quickness.
Yeah.
And the thing is, like he was dehydrated, and that led him to sundowning a lot. And just that visible proof from the past actually led to the future where it's like, you know what? If I'm going to preserve my mind, preserve my youth, and try to be the best me that I possibly can, try to sip more water throughout the day and drink as much water throughout the day as opposed to just trying to guzzle down a bottle a day or whatever.
Those are really good. I'm bad about the chugging the water. I drink enough water, but it's not throughout the day. Mainly because I gotta
Yeah.
pee all the time, so it gets annoying. But
Yes, exactly. Especially as you age. It's like, damn. Like, man, I'm not old, but what the freaking heck,
what is
man?
going
What's
on? No, so, and I want to go back to number two where you talk about the consistency because that's the thing that I find most interesting about you is I kind of mentioned it that being so prolific in the episodes and doing 600 of them at this point. What why did you start and why do you keep going?
Good question indeed. Well, why did I start? It actually was my main quest at one time because, funny enough, as we go through life and looking for success, for those who may have seen that meme where they got two arrows of success side by side, the first side is what we think it is a straight line going up north east, but what it truly is you're going up north, but it turns to a bunch of squiggles where you're going east, west, back down, southeast, southwest, all over the darn compass. And then you finally eventually make it to your north. And that's what it was for me. My side quest was actually publishing a book a few, let's say, it's probably about a good 16 months after doing one of the activities from a book called The Magic of Getting What You Want by David Schwartz, where you would write out your own obituary. And one of the things I wrote in that obituary is that I was going to be a best-selling author of
Mm,
multiple books. And a few months later, went to a conference and I was networking with folks. And one lady dared me to write a book after checking out my reading list where I wasn't listed as an author. Now, granted, my contact info was at the bottom because that was basically my business card at the time because businesses cards end up in the trash or forgotten.
mhm.
So to be remembered, I basically handed out a reading list to people. And when she looked at the list and was like, "Hey, Dom, so where's your name on the list?" It's like, "Oh yeah, it's at the bottom of 443." Like, no, not talking about that. I'm talking about you as the author here. And I'm like, oh, I was like 22 at the time. I'm like
Wow.
freaking like, what the heck am I gonna freaking read about? I'm like 20 freaking two. And she was like, "Hey, how about a year from today, write a book?" And I'm like, that sounds a little too intense. Nah, I think I'm good. Okay, how about we both write books? You'll be together, we write books, become published authors a year from today. And I'm like, wow, all right, that sounds freaking amazing. Like that's some kind of first to put themselves out there like that. And I'm like, nah, I think I'm good. And then after that conversation shortly ended, a few days later, gave a talk and there was a Q&A session required for this talk I had to give. We were basically practicing talks in Toastmasters. A buddy of mine who I told the conversation about with the lady earlier, the first question was from him in the crowd. Now, granted, the topic had nothing to do with writing books at all.
All right.
The first question was, "Hey Dom, when are you gonna write your book?" And then a massive just silence, just awkward silence just filled the room. And I'm like, that was like the longest 5 seconds ever, because that 5 seconds felt like 2 years, since years feel like months nowadays.
Hmm.
And I was like, man, I don't look like a punk upstage. So I said, you know what? A year from today, I'm gonna write my book. Ran home, wrote 14 pages of raw content, took a little hibernation for 2 months, eventually published the book in 2016. Then needed a way to market it the following year because sadly lost my dad in March of 2017 after publishing the book. And I decided to do, you know what? Let me just go ahead and start this podcast since I finally got this book. I need a way to market it. Let me start a show to market the book. And then after having conversation with folks, I realized, you know what? Maybe I should interview other authors and give them a platform to get their voices heard. And little did I know that staying consistent with it led to so much freaking growth because it gave me a chance to connect with people, learn from other authors, some do's and don'ts from their publishing journey when they published their books and put themselves out there and applied to my own life and just getting that personal growth. And that just kept me going to the fact that where it's like now 630 official episodes with 800 episodes total thanks to the bonus episodes.
Oh
It's
wow.
like it's been one heck of a journey. What keeps me going is just meeting so many great people and being able to really just have all that growth come from it. And my goal is to interview over 1,000 authors across the globe. So about a good 750 of them there. So about another 250 to go. So I'll probably be there probably about a good, I guess, 18 months away at this point.
Yeah. So is was Going North the first book?
Yes, sir, indeed. Going north, tips and techniques to advance yourself.
And how does someone write I kind of want to get in your mind of sitting down writing a self-help book at 23 years old? Like, because I think a lot of people, myself included, right? You taking that first step into any endeavor can be scary, but then you're also kind of putting yourself out there as an expert, someone that can do it. But then there's a little bit of imposter syndrome too, right? So how do you battle all those things? How do you sit there and create the content that was in it?
Hey, man, definitely good point to bring up, especially nowadays where that's one of the gaps that kind of holds us back from success is that comparison gap that leads to
Mm.
imposter syndrome. Because the thing was, I actually had to deal with that with my follow-up book, Stay the Course, where I basically was interviewing all these folks with larger followings than me, have done way more things than me, some millionaires even. And it's like, I'm talking about elite performance. It's like, am I really the person to talk about elite performance after talking to some of these folks? And what helped me to get over that edge was realizing that there's a spin that I have, a different bent that I have, a different slant that I have to reach certain people that they may not be able to reach. And even though they are elite performers in their field, they may not write a book about elite performance. And if they decide to, that's a okay. But it's not going to be the same sauce they're going to get from me. And realizing that every single person has a gift that they need to unleash and give to the world and share with the world, and that there's going to be people that you're going to be able to reach that others may not be able to reach. Heck, even Christ himself, the anointed one in the good old ancient book of the Bible, even he said that his disciples were going to do greater works than him. And Peter, the loudmouth of the bunch, he definitely did. Thousands of souls, they definitely found a new level of salvation. They were able to get that salvation in the book of Acts, and churches were starting to be created all over different parts of that part of the world. And that happened because he encouraged disciples. He basically led those 12 men. He gave them his lessons. They spent time with them and they took those lessons and they ran with it. There are some lessons that we are born to take and run with. And you just have to ask yourself, am I willing to run with a lifetime with this message of being able to grow with it? Because sometimes you have to encourage yourself to really get out of your own funk and do it, because it's great to have people around you. I encourage it, but sometimes you still gonna have to encourage yourself to get out of bed on that day when it's just you, yourself, and I. And it's like you're not gonna feel like doing it, but just realizing that there is a different way. Like you, it's like a cookbook. The recipe is the same, but the cook is gonna be different because you can't just eat at everybody's table. Because some
Yeah.
folks, some of the stuff you see on social media, they may be having the dog licking the dish. They may be having some animals in the kitchen, as opposed to the person who has the same recipe book, but they don't believe in pets being in the kitchen. So you don't have dog hair in your cake.
Right.
So if you're gonna give them the message, the cake without the dog hair, be that person. Don't be the person out there giving folks that lemon pound cake with the dog hair in it.
I You kind of gave me goosebumps. I'd never heard that analogy of Christ talking to the disciples about it. That was really cool. So I kind of got lost in thought there. Um But whenever I'm going to go back a step too, because you talked about doing, I forget what you called it, but the kind of like the conscious effort of saying what good did I do today, or what good am I going to do the next day. I was talking to a behavioral scientist recently, and he touched on the fact that just bringing that to the forefront of your mind is what makes it so powerful. Because I was asking, why does journaling work, or why does that kind of stuff actually help? Because I'm bad about doing it, and there's actual scientific evidence that making those connections between writing something down and just always thinking that you're going to have to answer that question later is what brings it to the front of your mind. So when you're going about your day, you think about things differently. And I've seen in other interviews you've done, you've talked about that as well. So I just want to know, how does your life change in a positive way by changing the framework of your thought to say, I'm going to focus and be cognizant of what good happened today, or what good did I do tomorrow? Like how did that change the way you went about life?
Good deal. That question is a great one because it's so true about having that right frame of mind, that framework of really setting yourself and thinking on the good, because that actually helped me to get out of the funk. Because the thing is, those books that came into my sphere of influence of changing my mindset for the better. Actually, I'm going to develop a better mindset of, hey, just not focusing on pessimistic thoughts. It's like, oh yeah, like growing up in high school, being the loser kid. Like one, like a lot of folks saw my yearbooks back in the day, but one of the most stupidest backhanded compliments I remember getting was, "You're the coolest loser kid I know," and I'm like, the fudge. So it's like, all right, how am I gonna get past that old dumb? It's really just focusing on, all right, let me change myself for the better, do things differently. Because if you want to get something you've never done, you have to do something you've never done. And that involved doing new things, being more extroverted, if you will, because I'm an ambivert today, thanks to reading some of John Maxwell's books and one of the lessons of walking slowly through the crowd to learn folks' names, learning about them and their business, their family, and just seeing how you can help them, not giving thought to your own business, but to the true business of helping other people, not being the nosy business. The nosy business, the gossiping, that's totally different. Don't be about the nosy business, be in the helping business. And that's really what I'm really all about, just helping other people, because people will remember that. Like I still remember going to a communication seminar a buddy of mine was hosting, and he had a few folks that actually bought into the Facebook ad, and we networked, and one of them was a photographer, and he actually handed me his contact info. And I'm like, all right, cool. I'll keep this information in case you need it down the road. And little did I know, about a good year or so later, I interviewed an author, and she needed a photographer for her book signing, because when I did the recording with her, she had the rough draft finished, but she didn't have her official launch party yet. And she was like, I need a photographer. So I submitted her about a good, I think it was 5 to 7 different names with 5 to 7 different websites. And the guy that I met that day who handed me his card, she liked his site the best because it was the most professional out of all of them. And he got that gig that day. And when I needed new headshots, I went to him. He gave me an extra set of photos that he doesn't usually give to other clients because I referred him business. And that was a 2 year that was basically a 2 year turnaround time. Because the thing is, you never know who you're going to meet. You never know who you're going to affect. He actually got business that day. Now, granted, it didn't happen in 2 minutes. It happened in a 2 year time span where he got double business. But just the act of putting yourself out there, focusing on the good, no matter how small it is, it can be a compound effect, and it can snowball down the road. Just think, like, if you build up enough good habits and they roll down that mountain and create this giant avalanche of positivity as opposed to negativity. Just imagine how far you can go, especially when you document your process. And heck, even with the journaling, heck, even going for once a week as opposed to once a day, like just focusing on what you can do as opposed to what you can do. Because sometimes when you focus on what you can do and the good and you get started, you can get into the flow and that wonderful good state where the words just keep coming out of you and they keep flowing out of you. And then you'll be able to clarify your thinking, because that's another bonus of writing things down, like writing down your wins, writing down the things you're grateful for, documenting your days, documenting your weeks, is that you get to look back on them, you get to clarify your thoughts. And one day you may guest on a podcast like this one or host your own podcast. And if you do a solo cast, you'll have stories to draw back from. You'll have experiences to draw back from, because you got all this proof lying around of the things you've done, no matter how big or small, to really direct you forward. So that's really the power of having that great mindset and creating that avalanche of positivity through positive action.
I like the avalanche of positivity. So if you could, and not just consider yourself, if you're introverted, how does someone go from that to, I mean, writing a book's putting yourself out there too, but then starting a podcast and requesting people to, like, how did you overcome that? I mean, I know you mentioned reading a book, but do you still consider yourself introverted, like by nature?
Let's say an ambivert. I'm a little bit of both. At the end of the
Okay.
day, we're all both. We just lean on one side more than the other. Because at the end
Yeah.
of the day, introversion versus extroversion. Introversion is all about recharging by being alone. Extroverts and extroversion is all about recharge by being around other people.
Hmm.
And the thing is, I can be a social butterfly for a good long time, but sometimes I need to recluse and get back into my metaphorical cave so I can rest and recharge. And I learned more about myself from actually doing an activity. Heck, even listeners can take this home with them, where you mirror force yourself. And this is where you take, or should I say, this is where you ask folks that you know of, that you trust, three things that you're good at and three things that you could work on. And when they give you that feedback of the three things that you can work on, make sure that you ask for explanation and don't interrupt at all. Just let them get it all out, and then just take it in and see if it applies. Because one thing that a guy mentioned, a friend of mine, a close friend of mine from high school, is that back in the day, I had introversion slash, or should I say, antisocial tendencies from the outside looking in. And the thing was, we haven't seen each other for a couple of years since he moved to Arizona and just was visiting. And I asked him about that activity when I was just starting my new self development journey. And I was like, oh, wow, I didn't even think of that. It caught me aback at first, but again, I had to look at myself in the mirror and force myself to go forward and realize, okay, well, what's another way to put myself out there and be around other people? One thing I was doing Toastmasters at the time. I was part of one club. I decided to join an additional club because that's more people to meet, more opportunities to practice my talks and practice new content in an audience. And little did I know that joining that additional club led to multiple opportunities and ascend that Toastmasters volunteer ladder to oversee 17 clubs in the Northern Maryland area and meeting all sorts of wonderful people and getting that leadership experience in that sandbox. And that's something I recommend for everyone to do, at least at one point in their lifetime, is to join Toastmasters International to really get themselves out there and really talk amongst other people and be on stage and get that stage time, because public speaking is still one of the top fears on earth for every human on earth. Like the old joke of the guy in the casket and the guy giving the eulogy. They'd rather switch places because folks are so scared
Yeah.
of giving the eulogy. They'd rather be the guy in the casket. So it's like, oh, they're staring at me, but I don't have to talk though, as opposed to the guy giving the eulogy. Like if you can conquer that fear at that level, that'll help you to conquer fears at another level.
What would you, or what's some advice you'd give to somebody that said that thinks they'd like to write a book, or maybe is starting the process of writing a book? What's something they should think about?
Sure thing. First thing is ink it when you think it. Ink it when
Mm,
you think it. Because the thing is, especially in the middle of the night, when you have a great idea and you'll think you remember it in the morning, good luck. It's going to be lost forever in the sand of time. It'll go to another person, most likely, because you'll forget and you'll never remember. Even if you're
yeah.
like 21 listening to this podcast, you're going to freaking forget it. Trust me, that happened to me. And I was 22 writing my book, and I let a thought fly away from me. But like inking things when you think it, like making sure you jot it down exactly as it is, like don't even doing symbols or nothing. Because funny enough, I was on another podcast, and when I brought this up, she was like, "Yeah, you're right. I even tried putting acronyms on a piece of paper and not writing down the whole thing because I figured I'd figured out what it was in the morning, and they couldn't even decipher their own
They're-
hieroglyphics. So no hieroglyphics
That's
here.
awesome. But whenever I'm going to get into the weeds a little bit here, but what did you like create an outline of what you wanted the book to look like, or was it literally just as you had thoughts, like you kind of had a North Star to say, you were going north. I know the topic I'm writing about, so I'm just going to kind of, brainstorm the ideas as they come, or was there truly an outline, like chapter by chapter, maybe?
Good question. There was an outline, and that's really probably the foundation of all good books, especially nonfiction books, is to have that outline. Because the thing is, it allows you to focus. Because that's really what helped me to get my book done within those 10 months and meet my year deadline for the first book, that is. Because I had a coach at the time, and he mentioned, hey, you got to have this outline done. And we went through it together. And I basically had something to go through. I had basically got a map. And the thing was, when I would write, I would basically put topics at the top of the page, like leadership, all my thoughts about leadership, write them all on the page, go to the next page, keep going, or picking a different topic like time management. Like, what do I think about time management? And what have I learned and what has actually worked in my own life? Like putting that down and just going bit by bit and brick by brick. And then once you have all the stuff that you can possibly muster within the time limit, like really the outline, having that into like a separate Google Doc, and then each outline chapter filling those words with the stuff that you already wrote down about those separate topics, and then polishing it up as you go along. So that way you're not just going wherever the wind blows, because there's a term for that called pantser. That's usually for the novelists out there, like writing at the seat of your pants, where you just start writing whatever, and then characters start to take their shape and they live lives of their own, and then you just keep writing and writing and writing until the story is basically told for each and every character.
Yeah.
And that's not my style, because I usually write nonfiction. I may write novels down the road. That's been an idea of mine, but right now nonfiction's my main squeeze at the moment. That's where I land to go. But yeah, getting that outline in and then filling in the outline with the parts that I've written, and then making sure you get a good editor too. Like don't put an unedited book out there, or at least someone to actually proofread your work. And also realize that you can read your book 10 times and there's going to be a typo that's going to be hiding somewhere waiting to show up
Yeah.
after you printed out the book and had your book. It's happened to me and I hate it. It's like, dang it. I thought I caught all of you.
did did you like did so you just use an editor, or did you use like a copywriter, someone that also helped with like the actual the structure of the book itself?
Yeah, definitely. With the second book, I actually ended up having someone to do not only the proofreading, but also the book editing, and to also do a copy editing itself. Because and sometimes you may even need multiple editors, because different there's different styles of editing. Like there's the proofreading, that's a okay, that's cool and all, but you're gonna need a content editor sense, because sometimes, especially me, sometimes I can make the mistake of assuming, oh, okay, if I say this one sentence, they'll get it. They can read my mind. They'll be fine. But it's not, that's not the case. You got to really expound on your points to actually prove them. It's kind of the reason why storytelling is a major thing. It's like when you tell a story and make a point, that point will be driven home, as opposed to making a point and then they're like, oh, that's a good tip. And you're basically going about your day, as opposed to it actually sticking. Heck, even for example, I was in church one day and they had a guest preacher. He was actually a seasoned preacher, has been around for decades, and he told the story about how he was building his church back in the day and he needed some stained glass windows. And he contacted a guy out in the North Carolina area of the US of A for some stained glass windows, since he had a great reputation for some great stained glass windows. And the thing was, when he was building the church, he was kind of on a shoestring budget. He was able to get enough donations to get the land, to get everything up. But those windows, they were going to be a pretty penny, at least 60 grand. But the thing was, his father was also a preacher. The preacher who needed the windows. And his father, that pastor, actually bragged about the guy he went to business for, the stained glass windows, and he kept them in business for years after that, for decades after that. And he did those stained glass windows for him free of charge, all because of his father getting him so much business. And it just goes to show the fact that, hey, because of his daddy, like his, for like the message was daddy's sake, like his father put in a good word and actually looked out and helped someone else get their business. And in turn, that same man looked out for his son. And that circle of life was complete because his father looked out for someone, and that same someone looked out for that father's son. And that really, there's like so many points in there of, hey, be careful the way you treat people. And of course, making sure you can make as many friends as possible. And also help out folks when they're starting out. Never neglect small beginnings because one day you may need them for business. And he got that business deal 10 times over in the future for his church. So just the power of story to bringing a point home is something to always keep in mind, whether you're giving talks, being interviewed on podcasts, writing books, but making sure you drive that point home, and then really having a team of people because you're going to need editors, copy editors, and all those wonderful things. And then, of course, need some beta readers if you really want to take it to the next level because your beta readers are going to catch things that you aren't going to catch, even those wonderful typos that sneak in at the last minute. So that way, that collaborative, collective effort can help you become a champion in your own right.
Because I know this just from writing small articles. It'll be like if you write something and then you try and proofread your own writing, it's like your brain just corrects things, or you have your own, it's like you can almost read into the intent behind it rather than the words that are actually there. So I was just curious of how someone really puts out a book, you know. But I think it goes back to like that story made me think of you talking about putting out that positivity again too, like how that's so important and always comes back. But what's next for you? Like, is it more books? Is it, just continuing with the podcast? What are your goals going forward?
Sure thing. Got some goals up on the horizon for 2023. Got 3 books in the works. The first one's going
Wow.
to be all about podcasting. And that's going to be tips for creating a successful podcast. That's going to be about podcasting. Then the follow up book is going to be all about book writing and publishing your book and getting that successful. And then the third book is going to be combining the first 2 books into the final project to put it all together called Bookcast It, the 3 R's of content creation to create your legacy. And that's really what I'm working on. And that's the goal with the writing and the podcast itself. On road to interviewing over 1,000 authors across the globe. I'm about 3 months ahead on both ends with guests waiting to be recorded and recorded interviews in the can waiting to be dropped in the future. So yeah, staying busy.
What? No, absolutely. What is a successful podcast to you? What does that mean?
I'd say a successful podcast to me is a consistent show that actually helps other people. And helping other people doesn't always have to be how to tips, the dry business stuff, author interviews or entrepreneur interviews. It could even just be entertainment because we're still going to need entertainment. It's great to have entertainment. We all need to be entertained a little bit because life is meant for living. So a successful podcast is one that has longevity that helps out other people, whether that's through educating others or entertaining others, or if you're in that supreme realm of edutaining where you're doing both, you're an educating entertainer. Heck, that's even another reason why teachers deserve higher pay as a quick sidebar, because the entertainment aspect's not put into play. Because as a teacher, you got
Yeah,
such little time, you got so many kids in the room, you got to keep them all engaged. And it's like, you got to entertain them a little bit so they can really get the lesson in if they're paying attention.
that's a great point. Why do you think that podcasting is so valuable to an author?
Yeah, podcasting is definitely valuable to authors because it's a way to keep your readers engaged. And then when those readers become listeners, those listeners will grab other listeners if your content is good. And then once you get more listeners, they'll become more readers. And then you'll have that fodder to really keep yourself going, especially if you intend to truly be an author. Because the thing is, most authors, especially ones that enjoy putting books out there, they're not going to stop at one book. They're going to want multiple books. And the podcast for me, one of the main things, and I consider one of the biggest victories for me from the podcast was the fact that not only did my follow a book stay the course become a bestseller on Amazon, it was the fact that one of the launch team members, Stanley McCloskey, I mentioned one of the incentives of being on the team is that I would give you a shout out in a future episode. And I gave him a shout out during one episode that featured a veteran author. And the title of that episode was Escape Average, Go for Big. And one thing he mentioned in that episode is that if you haven't failed in 6 months, are you truly living? And that put a fire under his butt to where a year later, Stanley decided to write his book, Divorce is Worse Than Death. And just him just being so happy and heck, even hired me to be the voice of his book and even wanted to buy me steak dinner. I'm like, man, like you don't have to do all that, man. I'm just grateful that you finally joined the business of immortality, man. You asked me to be the voice of your book. You don't have to do all that. Like I'm grateful for that already. And he was just so grateful that he had the confidence to really go forward and do that for himself and actually join the business of immortality. Like being able to see him grow in that aspect from the podcast. So yeah, so just if you're an author and you got readers, start that podcast so you can have listeners that'll eventually attract other listeners that'll continue your wonderful circle of life and become more readers for your future books.
Outside of the consistency piece of it, what do you recommend for someone like me that's starting a podcast or is early on it? Obviously it's important to kind of keep those episodes coming, but is there any other tips, tricks you have for someone thinking about doing it or already doing it?
Yes, always market your show. That's one mistake I made
Mm.
in the beginning. Like I just thought, hey, put it out there, they'll figure it out, they'll listen, right? Like no, you can't just put something out there once and expect people to catch it. Like there's still folks out there. They'll be like, oh yeah, you're doing good things. Your podcast, you're like episode 300, right? I'm like, yeah, that was in 2020 or was that episode 320. like like you have to continuously market yourself, put yourself out there. So hopping on Twitter, hopping on Instagram, if TikTok is where you want to gather listeners, that's cool, go for TikTok. If Clubhouse is still good for you, that's great too. I hopped on Clubhouse for a bit back when it first started and I just stopped getting on the darn app because I'm like, dude, I listen to so much dang content. I don't want to hear all these folks rambling, feeling like they're gurus all freaking day. Like I just can't do it. But like just always marketing your show, being the billboard for your show. Like I got merch through tpublic.com and the podcast logo is in t-shirt form, pin form. Heck, even can put it on notebooks. Heck, even I got custom Nike ID shoes that say going north on them, and they are blue and gold, just like my podcast logo. So making sure like you're all in with being the billboard for your show and putting yourself out there all the time and always resharing episodes and linking yourself, or should I say, linking new episodes back to old episodes. Because one thing that I've noticed a few years ago when I guested on another show, they put recommended episodes in the show notes to older episodes. And I'm like, wait,
Uh,
that's freaking genius. So it's like with the big backlog, folks may not know where to begin. It's like if, like, for those who pay attention to the show notes and they click on that link and they actually listen and they go down the rabbit hole of your content, you'll be in a good spot. Heck, even one more thing for you.
please.
There's a book out there. I haven't read it yet, but I went to Podfest 2023 and a speaker mentioned the main idea of the book oversubscribed, where you can actually have a lifelong subscriber by having them listen to you for at least 7 hours. So, going back to that point of linking old episodes with each new episode release, if they match up, they'll eventually get to that 7 hours. Then they'll eventually follow you for a bit of time. And if they stay with you for a long time, then that's even a bigger win. So, those are just a few tips for podcasting. I keep that last one that I picked up from Podfest that I haven't dropped on the podcast yet.
Nice. Appreciate it. But what's the goal then for, the Going North podcast? When you think, you mentioned getting to the 1,000 authors, is it just then setting new targets, or is it like what happens after that?
Definitely new targets. Definitely want to get a bigger team around the show because if you compared, well, then again, comparison gap. But if you
Yeah.
compare like my show to some of the others in my category in terms of the level of content, they have a great team of people around them to really help them to get their content in the best form possible. So definitely want to get a better team around me to hopefully get things going to where I have a better website, be able to take episode clips and clip things up to where I don't have to do all that myself. Then definitely want to move to making it a daily show, at least 5 days out
Oh
of the
wow.
week. So that's the goal for it because some folks will be like, hey, you only interview authors like on your podcast? Like, really? I'm like, dude, over 1 million books are published every year on freaking Amazon, bro. Like, there's a lot of
I didn't
authors out
realize
there,
that.
man. Yeah.
Plenty of guests that you could have.
I'm not trying to interview 1 million people, though. I'll say that. 1,000's the goal, not 1 million. Ain't not
Hey,
everybody
don't
got
don't
time
sell
for
yourself short. If you're just doing it every day, that's
that.
still a lot of days. But
Yeah. Yeah. They say we only got 20,000 of them, give or take. 20,000 days equivalent to like 70 years. So we'll see.
I don't like when you put it in that term.
It's scary, right?
Yeah, I don't like that.
Go for 40,000 days.
There we
Live to
go.
140 like you're in the Bible.
I like it. So what's the best way for listeners to find you to connect with you?
Yes, I probably unleashed a whole freaking avalanche of content on folks today. So, well, just take one thing and do it if it applies. If you made it this far, and if you're not spinning your head, and if you're not spinning your head, and you're not having a lampshade over your head, head over to dombrightman.com. That's dombrightman.com, and there's a free opt-in gift called the 21 Lessons Learned from 5+ years of podcasting. If you want to start, grow, and manage a successful podcast of your own, and you can find all that on dombrightman.com.
I do. I think I have one more question I want to ask, and that's what's your recommended reading list right now?
Oh God.
Just give me like three.
Okay, I'm about to say, damn, bro, I read 50 books a year on average. Like
That's good.
so let's see here. The Power of One More by Ed Milet. That one's a good one, especially this chapter about time management. Like, if you can do that, you're a freaking beast. Pick up his book to learn more about that. Also, John Maxwell's upcoming book, The 16 Laws of Communication, that's going to be out in March of 2023. I'm kind of chomping at the bit, almost foaming at the mouth, looking forward to reading that book because I'm like, dude, like his laws of leadership, the laws of growth, like the laws of
Mhm.
teamwork, they're all good. Like my man's got a communication book, and like I'm looking forward to that one. Another book for folks to pick up, Influence is Your Superpower. I believe Zoe Chance is the author of that one. So Influence is a superpower. And heck, even a couple bonus other books to recommend folks. Guest out on the show, Holly Wharton. She has a trilogy, or actually, she has more than a trilogy, but she has a wonderful book series all about business. There's business beliefs, business mindset, and business visibility. Let's say add those to your reading list as well, because they're like 100-page books, and she's done two out of the three of them on audio, and she's from the UK, so she has a pleasant accent while you're getting in the content.
Nice to listen to, right?
Oh yeah.
Hey, Dom, I can't thank you enough for taking the time to do this. You gave me a lot of tips and inspiration. Much appreciated. But I just wanted to say thanks, man.
Hey, thank you, Jordan, man. Appreciate it. Funny enough, one of my close buddies is named Jordan, so you're good people.
I agree. All right, Dom. Hopefully we chat again soon, my man.